These two works don't seem to have anything to do with one another. They look as though they were painted by different artists. They look as though they were painted at a completely different period. They're so different in style. But what's amazing is that not only are they by the same artist, it's actually the same work of art. This is on the front and this is on the back. Hello, my name's Siân, and today we're looking at Albrecht Dürer's panel of St. Jerome in the National Gallery. And we're going to be thinking about the question, when was the last time you looked at the back of a painting? Now, it's not something we do very often, because when we come into a gallery space, we're normally presented with the front of a painting. But we flip the Dürer panel over, we find this amazing, almost like an explosion. And it's almost like the painting on the back, which is very, very spontaneous and very modern looking. It's almost as though it hasn't got anything to do with the front, certainly in terms of technique. So how are these two related? So let's look at the front of the painting. Let's concentrate on this image of St. Jerome. Now, St. Jerome here is painted absolutely exquisitely with such attention to detail. And that's very, very typical of Dürer. He had a very methodical way of painting. So the more you look in this painting, the more you see. And I think that's actually very deliberate, because I think it would have been made as a devotional aid, as a meditative aid. What do I mean by that? By the person who bought it or who owned it, the more they looked, the more they would see, and they would pray in front of it. So all of these details would be picked up every time you look, every time you admire it, every time you venerate it, you'll see something new. This is quite a Venetian work. What do I mean by that? Albrecht Dürer went twice to Venice, one between 1494 and 95, one between 1505 and 1507. And when he went to Venice, he absolutely fell in love with Venetian painting, particularly the work of Giovanni Bellini. And actually, we have a painting in the National Gallery by Giovanni Bellini, also of St. Jerome in the wilderness. And it's very interesting to compare the two because they've got a lot in common, particularly this rich, saturated use of colour. So Dürer, from his first trip in Venice, his work becomes quite Venetian in style. And what's interesting actually is this painting was once thought to be a Venetian panel. And then various investigations, it was realized that the painting was actually by Dürer. And one of the most important elements to link it to Dürer was this wonderful lion on the right-hand side, because this lion is almost identical to a signed and dated watercolor by Albrecht Dürer, which is now in a museum in Germany. So that's one of the things that links this painting to Albrecht Dürer. There are quite a lot of clues in the painting that tell us about St. Jerome's identity. That is, clues or attributes or symbols that we associate with St. Jerome. And I love this lion on the right-hand side. I mean, he just almost looks like a pet Labrador that wants to go out for a walk. There's something very benevolent and tame about him. And I think that's the point, because St. Jerome, according to legend, is supposed to have tamed a lion. How did he tame this lion? He tamed it because the lion was injured and had a thorn in its paw. And according to legend, St. Jerome plucked the thorn out of the paw of the lion, and he rescued the lion, and the lion was therefore saved and became his great friend or companion. Now, St. Jerome is quite thin, he's quite emaciated, quite muscular, but you see him here in a very simple blue robe. And why is he quite, as I say, quite muscular, but quite emaciated at the same time? Because when he was living as a penitent in the desert, we know that he spent time fasting, so he's quite slender. And what else do we have? St. Jerome also, we know, was a great scholar. And if you look on the left-hand side, you can see he's holding a book. Why would he be holding a book? St. Jerome is famous for having translated the Bible. He translated the Bible from the original Greek and Aramaic and Hebrew into Latin. It's known as the Vulgate. And that was incredibly important at the time because it made the Bible accessible to the Western world. People could read it in a language that they understood. It's actually why St. Jerome is the patron saint of translators. So if you're ever stuck with your Google Translate isn't working, you might invoke the assistance of St. Jerome to help you with your translations. And then if we look at the bottom of the painting, his outerwear, we have a red cloak and then this red cardinal's hat. Now, the position of cardinal didn't actually exist in St. Jerome's day. He lived in the 4th and the 5th centuries. But we often see him with a cardinal's outfit. And the reason for that is that he had a position not dissimilar from a cardinal in Rome. He worked as the secretary for the Pope in Rome. So that's why you sometimes see him with that attribute. And then let's go down to the bottom of the painting. These two beautiful little birds. Now, depending on what text you read, quite a lot of texts tell you that these are two goldfinches. I think that they're something a little bit different. I think there is a goldfinch, but I think the other might be a bullfinch. One's got a red breast and the other got a red head. Now, why would they be there? The goldfinch was a symbol of Christ's passion because it was said that the finch got its splash of red in its plumage because it plucked a thorn from Christ's crown of thorns, and then the blood from Christ's head stained its plumage. It's a rather fanciful interpretation, but that's why we think of the finch as being symbolic of the passion of Christ. So you've got these connections between the little finches at the bottom, the crucifix on the left-hand side, and then the story, remember, of St. Jerome is plucking the thorn out of the paw of the lion. And if we concentrate at the bottom of the painting again, there's so much botanical accuracy and detail. Now, Dürer loved nature. He made the most exquisite studies from nature, and he often incorporated those into his paintings. And I think we can find some of those here, from grasses to flowers, beautiful, beautiful details in the landscape there. So absolutely typical of Dürer's style. What happens when we flip the painting over? It's almost like it was made by a completely different artist. Well, it wasn't. It was made by the same artist, but it's so, so different in style. It's incredibly spontaneous, it's incredibly modern, and it was painted just in a matter probably of seconds or minutes. It's a technique known as wet on wet, so literally just putting on the paint, not building up the glazes very, very slowly like he does on the front of the painting. Just thinking about why you might paint the back of a panel, practically it wasn't such an unusual thing to do. It could stop the wood warping. It was a sort of humidity barrier. But if you were going to paint the back of a panel, something more common might be, for example, a coat of arms. And there are some examples in the National Gallery, like the Wilton diptych, which has the coat of arms of Richard II, or Memling's Paganotti triptych, which has the coat of arms of the Paganotti family. So that would be more common. But this is completely different. It can't possibly be a coat of arms. Now, what on earth is it? Some people have suggested that it could be a shooting star. Some people have suggested that it could be a comet, that it could be some kind of celestial phenomenon that Albrecht Dürer actually saw. And the problem with that theory is there doesn't seem to have been a comet that he could have seen in 1496 or thereabouts. So could it be something else? Could it be a dream? Well, we know that Albrecht Dürer writes that he had very, very vivid dreams. And he said that he had these very vivid dreams and that he dreamt of great things and great art, but then he'd wake up and then the memory of them was lost. And it's rather like us today. I don't know the last time you had a dream and you can remember that dream. I sometimes have very vivid dreams, but unless I write them down the next day, I can't remember them. So is this the pictorial equivalent of Dürer writing his dreams down? That's an intriguing, quite possible, suggestion. I think, however, maybe the most plausible suggestion is related to when the painting was made. Now, in 1496, we're coming towards the year 1500, when people were very afraid about the end of the world. There was very much this fear that the end of the world was nigh. And this comes across in literary tracts and in paintings and in poems. And around about the time that this painting was made, just a little bit later, I should say, a couple of years later, Albrecht Dürer publishes a series of prints on the theme of the apocalypse. That is the theme of the scenes, the events running up to doomsday, running up to the end of the world, based on revelations in the Bible. Dürer's revelation woodcut prints are absolutely extraordinary. They're very dynamic, they're very doom-laden, they're very, very powerful. And I'm sure that he was dwelling upon this theme of the apocalypse and revelations in the years coming up to the production of those woodcut prints. And so, is this Dürer thinking about that at the same time? Is this a visual manifestation of something that was dwelling upon his mind, almost in preparation, you might say, perhaps, for those woodcut prints? So let's think about how the front of the painting might relate to the back. We've talked about these signs of doomsday, signs of the apocalypse from Revelations, which Dürer was thinking about. But there's actually a connection to St. Jerome. In the Middle Ages, there was a tradition of the 15 signs of the 15 days before doomsday, which includes a description of a star falling out of the sky and hitting the earth. And that's pretty much what this looks like here. It was believed at the time that St. Jerome was responsible for rediscovering this tradition in literature. So actually you do have a connection between the front of the painting and the back of the painting. And I think to somebody looking at this painting or owning this painting in the 15th century, it would have provided great solace because this was a time of fear and apprehension. We don't know who owned it, but perhaps the person owning it would have felt this sense of fear and trepidation and worry perhaps about the end of the world. But they might have taken great solace in the knowledge that the great men of history and great saints such as St. Jerome also felt worry and fear and apprehension, but they would have been perhaps a sort of role model. And you would have been encouraged to pray for hope, just as Jerome is also praying for hope. So perhaps we could end by saying this is a painting which symbolizes great hope.